It's not exactly breaking news that President Trump is again beating up on the press, but the shot he took on the subject of Russia is rather revealing.
There has been nobody tougher than me. With the media, no matter what I did, it's never tough enough because that's their narrative.
So here he is at a news conference with the Japanese Prime Minister and talking about Russia. And there's two parts to this that I want to kind of unravel here. So the President of the United States, in very Trumpian fashion, says, nobody has ever been tougher on Russia than me. Now, it is true that very few people in the media believe that. Very few people in the foreign policy community believe that because, come on, I mean, Ronald Reagan going after the Soviets' evil empire, a little bit more of an adversarial relationship, shall we say, than Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. But I think the point that the president is trying to make is that he actually has been more aggressive against Moscow than the media are giving him credit for. And on that second point about the media narrative, I have to say he does have a point. There is a sort of a tone to a lot of the media coverage that the president is just determined not to take on Russia. And this has so much to do with the fixation on his words. Now, of course, the president's words, his tweets, his sound bites, all of that is very important to cover. Not trying to explain it away or diminish it in any respect. He almost always is saying positive things about Vladimir Putin. He almost never criticizes Putin. And he is constantly saying, you've heard this refrain many times, if we could get along with Russia, that would be a good thing. But then you have this other aspect to the policy, which is what the administration has actually done. The Trump administration has actually imposed sanctions on Russia. The Trump administration, with the president's approval, kicked out those 60 Russian diplomats after the murder of that spy in Britain. That was a record number, and that was a very aggressive action. So on the one hand, you do have an administration that is increasingly being, at the very least, adversarial toward the Putin government. And at the same time, in his words, you have the president being more positive. Now, it's hardly, unprecedented for an administration to be relatively aggressive and a president to be more measured or diplomatic, trying to maintain good relations with a foreign head of state. He does that with China. Great relationship with President Xi, but then, here's $100 billion worth of tariffs. And so there is, I think, something that lies behind the media conviction that the president is never going to take on Russia. And that is, of course, the Russia investigation. Because if you believe that there was some kind of collusion or secret deal, despite the fact that we haven't seen any evidence of that between the Trump campaign and the Russians in 2016, then you might believe that there's some sort of payback on the president's part when it comes to dealing with Russia. But again, there's sort of a split here between the president's conciliatory language and some of the sharper actions taken by his administration. Now, the reason this is all back in the news and why it came up at the news conference has to do with the flap over Nikki Haley that I spoke about the other day. She going on Face the Nation saying that sanctions were coming the next day. Sanctions didn't come. It looked like the president had changed his mind. In fact, it was a screw-up, a communication screw-up where she thought that she was delivering what was a final decision, and clearly the president hadn't made a final decision. He's entitled to change his mind. But it created an expectation that there would be sanctions, and so then when Trump says no sanctions, or he actually said, we'll do sanctions when the Russians very much deserve it, I guess that's not quite yet, that this was a change in policy. So to be fair to Donald Trump, his administration has not just rolled over for Moscow, but at the same time, there is a media narrative, and maybe it's a little bit more set in cement than it needs to be, that the president loves Putin and is never going to do anything to cross him. We'll see what happens, as the president says, but I did think he scored half a point at that news conference.